Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a piece of behavioral design that is so deeply ingrained in our global culture, you probably know exactly what it means without even thinking about it. Yep, the sports penalty card. Whether you're a die-hard fan of association football, rugby, or, hey, even fencing, you've definitely seen these brightly colored rectangles hoisted up into the air. But we aren't just going to sit here and read through the rulebooks today. Instead, we're going to explore the fascinating origin of this system, how it completely revolutionized the way we communicate under intense pressure, and how different sports have taken this really simple idea and just totally mutated it.
To start, I really want you to think about a core conflict here. How do you warn a player if you literally do not speak their language? Imagine the massive logistical nightmare of refereeing international sports before a shared visual language even existed. Picture it, you've got athletes from all over the world sprinting around, adrenaline is absolutely pumping, the crowd is roaring, and you, the referee, need to communicate a really complex ruling. You might speak German, but the players might only speak Spanish or English. Before the 1970s, referees literally had to rely on pointing, shouting, and shouting some more. And those verbal warnings, they often fell on deaf ears, or at best, just incredibly confused ears. It was a recipe for absolute chaos on the field.
So let's look at Section 1, the language barrier problem, a truly global problem.
To really understand why a new system was so desperately needed, we have to look at one very specific breaking point. We're going back to the 1966 World Cup quarterfinal between England and Argentina, played at Wembley Stadium. This match was, well, intensely chaotic. The referee, a German named Rudolf Kreitlin, had to make several major disciplinary decisions during the game. He cautioned the Englishmen Bobby and Jack Charlton, and he actually went so far as to send off the Argentinian player Antonio Ratin. But here's the wild part. Because of the deafening roar of the crowd and the complete lack of a shared language, nobody understood the decisions while the game was actually happening. It was so confusing that England's manager Alf Ramsey had to physically track down a FIFA representative after the match just to get clarification on what had actually occurred. The fans didn't know, the players didn't really know, and the press, they had to read about the official warnings in the post-match newspaper reports the next day. The system was just fundamentally broken.
That brings us to Section 2, the traffic light epiphany, and Ken Aston's big idea. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it perfectly captures a cinematic light bulb moment in behavioral design. Ken Aston was an English referee, and he was actually the guy responsible for all the referees at that completely chaotic 1966 World Cup. He knew for a fact that they needed a solution. As the story goes, he was driving his car, stopped at a standard traffic light, and boom, it hit him. A color-coding scheme based on the universal language of traffic lights. Yellow means stop if it's safe to do so, or in sports terms, a caution. Red means stop immediately, which translates to an expulsion. It didn't matter if you spoke English, German, or Spanish anymore. A bright red card held high up in the air transcends all language barriers. It immediately makes the referee's decision crystal clear to the offending player, their teammates, the opposing team, and literally thousands of fans in the stands.
Let's move into Section 3, World Cup card history, a brief history of how this rolled out.
Let's quickly trace how this brilliant flash of inspiration was rapidly adopted into global football. Way back in the very first World Cup in 1930, Peru's Plácido Galindo received the first ever send-off in the tournament's history. But of course, this was done entirely verbally. Fast forward through that messy 1966 language barrier incident at Wembley, and we arrive at 1970. The 1970 World Cup in Mexico marked the very first time physical yellow and red cards were actually used on the pitch. But get this, it actually took another 4 years for a red card to even be drawn. It wasn't until the 1974 World Cup that Chilean player Carlos Casali made history by receiving the first physical red card in the tournament during a match against West Germany. The universal visual language had officially arrived.
Which leads us to Section 4, Rugby and the Sin Bin. Let's see how other sports adapted the rules.
While association football definitely birthed the cards, other sports very quickly recognized their genius. But they didn't just copy the rules. They completely changed them to fit their own unique games. In football, a red card means a permanent dismissal, right? You play a man down for the rest of the game. But rugby union and rugby league adopted something slightly different called the sin bin. So the crucial point is that a player who receives a yellow card in rugby isn't just cautioned. They are temporarily suspended and sent to a physical seat at the side of the pitch, a literal penalty box.
And that number 10 right there is incredibly important in rugby. A yellow card equals exactly 10 minutes sitting in the sin bin. During that time, your team plays a man down. However, there's a super fascinating tactical exception built right into the rules. Because the front row of a rugby scrum requires highly specialist and frankly really dangerous physical skills, if a prop or a hooker is sent to the sin bin, a manager is actually allowed to replace them with another specialist. This basically ensures the scrums can continue safely even while the team is serving out their punishment.
Now, the introduction of cards to rugby in the mid-90s did come with a few growing pains, which gives us a pretty funny little anecdote. The All Blacks' Mark Cooksley technically received the very first yellow card in an international match after punching an opponent. The referee decisively pulled out the yellow card, sending a super clear message. The only problem? Well, the referee later learned that yellow cards hadn't actually been officially approved for international rugby matches yet. He totally jumped the gun. The first official yellow card was eventually given a bit later to England's Ben Clark during a Five Nations match against Ireland.
Now, just like in football, if you accumulate 2 yellow cards in rugby, it equals a red card and an immediate sending off. Red cards are strictly reserved for serious infringements. We're talking high tackles or shoulder charges to the head. But the sport is actually currently wrestling with its own rules. Recently, Super Rugby trialed a 20-minute red card. Under this pretty contentious trial, the offending player is dismissed, but after 20 minutes, the manager can actually bring on a tactical replacement. This has sparked a massive debate. On one side, some argue it keeps the game competitive for the fans. On the flip side, many officials argue that traditional, permanent red cards are an absolutely vital deterrent against dangerous play, which is essential for players' safety. It's a really fascinating tug of war between entertainment and protection.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 5, a rainbow of penalties. We're going way beyond just red and yellow now.
Because hey, if yellow and red were so successful, why stop there, right? Look at this rapid-fire comparison across the sporting world. In field hockey, they use a green card, which is actually triangular in shape, indicating a 2-minute temporary suspension. The sport of bandy uses a white card for a 5-minute penalty. Rugby Union recently introduced a blue card specifically for concussion protocols. In fencing, they use the highly ominous black card. If a referee issues a black card for severe rule infractions, like deliberate brutality or refusing to salute, that fencer is permanently excluded from the remainder of the competition. Seriously, their name in the official record is literally replaced with the all-caps words, "Fencer excluded." No messing around there.
So let's look a little closer at that 5-minute white card we just mentioned. In bandy, the offending player sits on a penalty bench near the center line, entirely unable to be replaced during those 5 minutes. But recently, the color white was used in a completely different and, frankly, beautiful way. In a Women's Cup game in Portugal's Association Football, the referees stopped play to issue a white card. But guess what? It wasn't a penalty at all. It was shown to medical staff to actively praise them for an act of fair play. It's the exact same visual tool, but completely inverted to reward good behavior rather than punish the bad. Pretty awesome, right?
And this brilliantly illustrates how sports just continue to adapt and evolve. The blue card in community rugby union isn't a punishment for breaking the rules. It's a mandatory medical safety procedure. If a referee suspects a player has suffered a concussion, boom, they show the blue card. This instantly removes the player from the game, triggering a super strict process that disqualifies them from any rugby activity for at least 12 to 19 days, depending on their age and the severity. It basically uses the indisputable authority of the penalty card system to enforce critical player health and safety.
You know, it's honestly amazing to think that all of this, the sin bins, the triangular green cards, the medical blue cards, the dramatic red card dismissals, every single bit of it traces back to one frustrated referee staring at a traffic light in the 1960s. He took a universal symbol and used it to cut straight through the noise, the language barriers, and the absolute chaos of the moment. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. Take a look at the complex, noisy situations in your own life or work. What communication barriers are you currently facing that might just be solved with a simple, universally understood color code? Something to chew on. Thanks so much for learning with me today.